Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, our guest is Leslie Draffin. And let me read Leslie's bio to you. This is really awesome. She helps midlife women and millennials get unstuck by showing them ways to build their mind-body connection, heal the wounds of unworthiness, get free from mental health challenges, and build a life they love. She is a trauma-trained somatic coach, psychedelic microdosing guide, and breath and meditation teacher with a special focus on helping women learn the language of their body. All of that sounds so amazing, and I can't wait to hear more about it. Leslie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Would you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got on this path? And I know this is a long story, but the short version of how did you get to become who you are today?
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Leslie Draffin, and I am all the things that you just mentioned, all those certifications. In a former life, I was a TV news anchor, and I spent about 15 years in journalism. So I came to my current work because I was really deeply disconnected from myself. I spent about 20 years punishing myself, numbing out through things like eating disorders and alcohol abuse, because really I had a super deep wound of unworthiness that was just made worse because at 18, a month after I lost my virginity, I got herpes. Now I'm a preacher's daughter and I'm from the deep south. So that shame spiral really set me into this unworthiness realm that I would stick to for, like I said, about 20 years. And what I did, being the eldest daughter, the overachiever, was get really addicted to hustling and trying to prove to everybody that I was worthy of loving. So I was really good at my job. I was making six figures by the end of it. By society's standards, I looked like I had it all. But internally, I was really struggling. I was anxious. I was depressed. I was burnt out. I was drinking in my late 20s daily, a lot daily. And, I went the Western medical route. I went to therapy. I got prescribed antidepressants and spent thousands of dollars on all these different modalities, spiritual modalities as well. But what finally helped me break free was learning embodiment practices like breath work and then microdosing psilocybin. And I feel like those teachers really helped me heal my mental health, connect deeply with my purpose, ultimately leave TV, get sober, overcome my poor body image, and finally really allowed me to reprogram my thoughts around what it is to be worthy. And now I help women do the same.
Yay!
Wow, that whole wound of unworthiness thing, man, that
deep.
Yeah, that it hits me right there. Yeah, and I'm sure so many people listening can identify with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
What is a somatic psychedelic guide?
Yeah. So a somatic psychedelic guide is somebody who bridges both somatics, which is a body-based way of coming back in touch with your sensations, of healing the mind-body connection, with the added avenue of psychedelics. I really work with people most often who want to microdose and come to me for psychedelic work, and then I sneak in the somatics. That's really how it's been for the past 2 years. But I think the best way to really explain it is we help you get out of your head, stuck in those thoughts, back into your body and deeper into your subconscious layers with that psychedelic work, so that you really can start to peel back the layers of all of the things that have kept you from who you truly are. And so that you can, like Raquel said, find and live a life that you really can feel excited about.
All of that, it sounds so fascinating. And I want to learn a little bit more about how psilocybin can help with that wound of unworthiness. Like, how is it getting you to the point where you can maybe recognize what that wound is and then how to work through whatever it is you need to work through?
Yeah. Perfect. So let's talk a little teensy tiny bit about the brain. And this is literally like a fourth grade level because I was never a science person. Psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, and those are what I work with people primarily on, that type of
Okay.
psychedelic. It impacts your serotonin 2A receptors in the body, and they're really densely located in one section of the brain that is a higher level processing center called the default mode. So, in your default mode, this is where your deeply held beliefs are, your abstract thinking, your sense of self. This is sort of the unconscious mind, right? This is,
Mm,
where you're operating at, your default mode. It's what gets
right.
you to work every day without you having to really think about it. It's those ingrained patterns. So, this gets really rigid as we age. When we're young, we have a very fluid default mode. That's why all these things, these little wounds, get tossed into that lake and kind of stay there. But
Mm-hmm.
as we're aging, you can think of it as sort of a frozen lake. No matter how many affirmations
Mm,
you throw at or talk therapy you throw at it, it's just going to bounce off and nothing's sinking to the
right.
bottom and getting through to you. So, when we ingest psychedelics, there's something called rebus, which is this phenomena known as relaxed beliefs under psychedelics. And so it softens and thaws that rigid default mode so that you're naturally questioning your beliefs. You naturally become more receptive to new information. Your rigid thinking, a lot of times, goes offline, and it really does open the door to this unconscious part of yourself so that you can start to reprogram and reframe things like your worthiness wound. So for me,
Mm,
I had such an issue with self love. Like, I would see
mm-hmm.
people talking about self love. And even in the beginning of me working as a menstrual cycle educator, very much like, I want to learn to love myself. I want to help people learn to love themselves too. I could not figure out why I couldn't do it. Like, why can't I love myself? Well, after I worked with a guide, because I worked with a guide for my first microdosing
Mm-hmm.
experience, we really started to uncover and unpack all of these different little wounds. And what I think I really got down to was that because I was adopted and because I got herpes at 18, that unworthiness, that feeling unlovable was
Mm,
deeply, deeply in my default mode. And so, to answer the question about how psilocybin helps, it helps to soften the areas of our brain where we think we're just stuck that way
mm-hmm.
and allows us to sort of look from above and peel away these little layers of the onion. Now, it doesn't happen immediately for a lot of folks. I mean, I'm working on this shit like for the last 3 years. It's still a process. That's generally how I look at it, working, so to speak.
Okay. It sounds to me, and please tell me if I'm oversimplifying this or if I'm just completely on the wrong track, but because you're also trauma informed, I think this maybe is in the right vein. It's often said that people who are recovering from trauma, that some things they probably shouldn't investigate for a while because of what it might bring up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds to me like maybe psilocybin would make it a little bit easier or less traumatic or maybe a little more palatable for people who are recovering from trauma to go through what kind of investigate what they've gone through. Is that
Sure.
right?
It can be. It can be for
Okay.
sure. When you talk about psychedelic work, you've got two main avenues. You've got microdosing, which is what I do most often, and
Mm-hmm.
that's helping people understand how to safely ingest teeny tiny amounts of psychedelics. We are not high, we are not tripping when we microdose at all. And then you've got the other realm where you are going on a full trip, where you are hallucinating, where the walls are breathing and colors have sounds. And so trauma can surface in both of those scenarios. But what I have found is that at the microdosing level, it is a lot more gentle. It's like, think
Okay.
about washing a glass. If you're going to turn that faucet on full blast, it's going to spray water everywhere and squirt stuff all over the kitchen and maybe like leak a little trauma.
Mm-hmm.
That's a full dose journey.
Got it.
Microdosing is turning it on at a trickle. You're cleaning out the glass in both scenarios, but one is just going to feel a little bit better than the
Got it.
other. And it's not necessarily to say that when trauma comes up it's a bad thing at all. It's just, can you be held by someone, right? If you're someone who's listening and you know you've had trauma in your past, that's really a call to do this with someone who is trained versus just eat some mushrooms that your buddy had at a party. But that's kind of the difference. Yes, you're definitely on thinking of that correctly. And I will also say, I like to think of microdosing as like opening up the closet into the subconscious and using a flashlight to like look at all the things so that when you're ready, you can see it versus just turning on the whole light and being like, ta-da, here's all your shit. So
Oh,
it's just a lot more gentle. And sometimes it takes a little longer than a full dose journey might take. But on the nervous system, which is what I do a lot with somatics, it's so much more sturdy and steadying and safe to do this where we're gradually increasing psychedelic doses.
okay.
And do you feel like microdosing is always about trauma? Are people always microdosing to uncover that? Or are there other things, other reasons why people might microdose?
I actually don't think people microdose for trauma mainly at all. I think microdosing is certainly, at least in my practice and in my own personal life, microdosing has some really amazing benefits day after day for mood, for the things you're struggling with on a day-to-day basis, like anxiety, overwhelm, inability to focus, mental fog. And so what I've noticed is I'll have people come to me and maybe they know they've had some sexual trauma in the past, or they came out of a narcissistic relationship and they know that's back there. But what microdosing often seems to do first is kind of make life a little better. And so then you can look at that. Certainly, you can heal trauma through microdosing. And I think that a combination of microdosing and full dosing is probably a little better for going after the trauma, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think in my experience, just to share with the audience and to talk about this again, Raquel, remember when I did the full dose and I actually had a conversation with the mushrooms and they said, you can do this one of two ways. Do you want to relive everything you've ever experienced, or do you just want us to rewire and wipe the slate clean? And I went for the rewiring.
Yeah, that sounds better.
I don't know, it's mystical. One of the things you said in your mindful microdosing guide is that keep in mind the medicine doesn't always give you what you want, it gives you what you need.
Yeah.
Trust, surrender, and let go.
Oh, those are hard for me.
Yeah, they're hard for everybody. That's why we need a little help from the microdose.
Good point.
And I put that in there because when I first started, I actually went to this guide with the intention of healing sexual shame and becoming more open to receiving pleasure, because I had a huge wound around being comfortable receiving oral sex, because that's how I had gotten herpes. So I start working with the mushrooms in this guide, and they heard me say, I want to become open to receiving pleasure. And they were like, my love, you aren't open to receiving shit. So you have to become open to receiving first. It was a very like Kali year when I started. I was at the lowest point in my mental health journey. I was struggling massively at work. I had huge amounts of burnout that I didn't really understand. And then I got diagnosed with PTSD, which I was really shocked about because I didn't think anything bad had ever happened to me. For that whole year, really, microdosing and mushrooms, and not that I microdosed for the whole year, but the lesson for that year was that you have to become open to receiving. You cannot white knuckle life, because we can't give you all the gifts that you deserve because you're holding on too tight to the shit that doesn't serve you. That's why I put that in there, because I went in there with this goal of becoming open to receiving pleasure. 18 months later, it certainly did give me that. But it's like, you can have like a place you want to go, and the mushrooms are like, okay, but first we got to go here, and then we're going to go here, and then we're going to go here, and we'll get there eventually. But surrender. And that's so hard. It was so hard for this type A perfectionist. Yeah, very hard.
I think it's hard for women in our culture in general, just because of the way that we've been socialized to basically to give of ourselves, and to surrender, release, and kind of like leave it up to the medicine to deliver what we need is a very scary prospect.
Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely can be.
You said microdosing can be used to ignite your sex life and heal sexual trauma.
Mhm.
How would one use it to like spice things up in the bedroom, perhaps?
So I think the first thing would be to really start working on your own self pleasure, your self intimacy. So I think microdosing really helps with that because it does help you see what you really want. So if you're someone who wants to work with medicine, work with mushrooms in this realm, the first thing I would recommend is working with a guide. The second thing I would recommend is when you ingest your mushrooms, thinking about and having this intention about play, right? About igniting the senses. Because I think pleasure and going straight into pussy and straight into sex for someone who has had sexual shame or sexual trauma, it's just going to be like, whoa, no, thank you. It's too much. So, how
Yeah.
can we think of play? What can I like remember from as a child that I really liked to do? And not sexually necessarily,
Mhm.
but like, can I bring more of that into my life? Can I think about all of my senses? How can
Mhm.
I enjoy what I'm eating, what I'm wearing, the way that I'm moving my body? And then when you get past that, how can I start to really worship myself like I'd want a lover to worship me?
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
More
Say
of that.
that. Say that
Woo!
again.
Woo! Woo!
So a beautiful ceremony would be to eat the mushrooms, eat your microdose, turn off all the lights, light a bunch of candles with a mirror. You know, we're dimming the lights. This isn't like the gyno. You know, dim the lights and have a look at your pussy, have a look at your vulva,
Mhm.
and look at it with kind eyes. Look at it
Mm.
as, you know, someone who's seeing it for the beautiful vulva and pussy that it is, right? I think we
Mm.
don't see enough people's pussies online. Like it's all porn and it's all clipped and
Yeah.
it's all, you know, whatever. So when I was doing this work, I started to look up people's art and look up yoni casting and look up these things that were like, okay, even artist renditions of different looking vulvas that weren't, you know, actually anatomical but might be cut out of paper. I have a wonderful
Mhm.
picture that's all cut out of paper and it's very cool. Getting some sensual massage oils and going slow, really, really slow. Because that's the other thing. I think that as women, we're told that like sex is for someone else, like our bodies are for
Yep.
someone else, our pleasure is for
Mhm.
someone else. And so
Mhm.
if we can take that back and start to build our own self trust and our own self intimacy, then, if you do have a partner who you want to include, you both can microdose. And again, maybe the first thing you're doing is a five senses practice where you bring a bunch of fun stuff into the bedroom and you taste things together, you smell things together, you use interesting things on your skin, and you're rubbing, and maybe penetration isn't even the first, not even the first, maybe it isn't even on the table at all,
Mhm.
right? So, because of the way that we're reprogramming the brain and we're rewiring these neural pathways, when you start with yourself, you're reminding yourself, you're having your brain relearn this is for me. This is
Mhm.
how I enjoy play and pleasure and sensuality. And then we would bring in the partner.
Hmm.
And that's what I did with my husband.
Okay. So I have to say two things stand out for me with what you're talking about. Maybe three. One is play, because a lot of times as we get older, we take on responsibilities, all these things, we get caught up in day to day, and we kind of forget about play.
Yeah.
We either forget about it completely or we forget what we like to do for play, or even that play exists. You're bringing that back in. Plus, you're talking about intimacy,
Mhm.
not just wham bam, thank you, ma'am. I mean, you're literally talking about exploring all the other parts of sex and intimacy, like touch and smell and taste.
Mhm.
Sounds fun, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Man, I got to get me some of all of this. I got to work on this.
And you know, and it gets to be fun, right? I think
Yeah.
the thing that I did when I started this journey in 2019 that was just really very much me and my masculine energy was I tried to do it all right. I tried to add all of the perfect self-care routines, and I had the great morning ritual that lasted for 90 minutes, and I forgot to let it be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said this multiple times on other shows. It's like, if I could go back and tell me one thing, just slow down. Just do one thing. Just one thing. The other thing I will add to that I kind of forgot to add was, in addition to the play and the self intimacy and the sensuality, it's, I think movement is really important. I was so resistant to dance. I'm not going to tell you to like put on sexy music and dance it out if that's something that you feel really resistant to, because my goddess, I was so resistant to it. Just learning to shake a little bit, learning to sigh with your full body, like allowing yourself to have movement in general. It doesn't have to mean that you're doing some choreographed dance or you're twerking in your room, although I do those things too. But that can also be really helpful, because you're reconnecting to the body in a way that, if you allow it, can feel really good. So the body has to learn, oh, this is good. This feels good. I like this.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense, because I remember in the early years of the podcast, Raquel and I had on someone who talked about somatics, and we were both so out of touch with our body. We were like, what is she talking about?
What is this word?
What do you mean? Where do I feel that in my body?
What do you mean my
I feel
body
it in
feels things? It's
I
in
feel
my
it in
head.
my head. Yeah, it definitely is a process. What are some practices for women wanting to reconnect with that, when you bring the psychedelics and the somatic practices together?
I created something called the shift method. It is a 9-minute daily practice. Okay, I just updated the ebook. It is so much better. That what Raquel has, it isn't out yet.
It?
Literally this weekend.
Oh.
It will be out soon. It will be out so soon, probably by the time this episode airs. So it's in much more, it's like 28 pages long. So it's like the microdosing guide. So the shift method is designed to be a 9-minute daily practice, where it's 2 minutes of journaling, 3 minutes of breath work, and 4 minutes of movement. That is, I would say, the bare minimum. And
with a playlist. By the way,
there's now 3 playlists. There's so many playlists now. So she got a facelift. She got a much needed little renovation. The reason why I included journaling and breath work and movement is because, like you guys said, a lot of us are in our mind. We think everything is here. So we start with journaling. And with the journaling, I ask them to, what sensations are you even seeking? Seek sensations, seek your feelings. What are you feeling? Write down a few words. We're only doing it for 2 minutes. This is just like a few key things. Write a scribble, write a smiley face. And that's actually a body scan. Like, unknowingly, they're body scanning, which is a meditative practice. Then with breath work coming next, it is a breath that I recommend for everybody who either wants to clear out trauma or wants to reconnect with the nervous system. It's in through the nose, out through the mouth with sound. So it's like a 4 inhale, 8 exhale. Yeah. Let it out. Let it be weird. And then with the movement, it's I know, right? Love that.
It does feel good.
It feels so good. And we can talk about why it feels good. But with the movement, it's starting with maybe just swaying, stomping your feet, bouncing up and down on the balls of your feet, cat, cow, stretch, do some hip thrusts. You don't have to get out here and like shake it for whoever, but you probably will at the end, because the playlists are very good. So that's, I think, what I would recommend anyone listening start doing now, regardless of if you're going to eat mushrooms or not. But I have noticed that with my one-on-one clients who also shift, I have one who's amazing. God, I love her so much. She shifts before she sees me, and and I'm just like, I didn't even ask her to do it. I never told her that's what she had to do, but she'll eat her mushrooms and then shift, and then I usually see her about 30 minutes after she's ingested her microdose. And the things that she has already been able to come up with and to notice within herself after 5 weeks, it's just amazing. So shift plus microdosing together seems to be such a yummy combination. But if you don't want to microdose yet, if psychedelics scare you, shift is something that you can do for free, because the shift method ebook is free, to start reconnecting to the sensations, start reconnecting to yourself, right? To get out of the head and into the body. And the kicker here is there's no meditation. because I had so many clients tell me, oh, I can't meditate and I don't like meditation and I'm in my head too much. Well, as an anxious babe with ADHD, sames.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Like I couldn't. It's like, oh, I'm not good at it now. I'm failing at meditation. Well, I'm sure as hell not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So it gets them out of the head, out of the mind, into the body. And time after time, like the thing that they'll write at the beginning, I'm anxious or I'm worried about this. At the very end, I have them take stock of what's come up. And oftentimes it's like, oh, that's not even a big deal. I've just shifted it out of me.
Ah, called the shift.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to tell you all a little secret. I microdosed this morning.
Oh,
And
nice.
and I didn't know about the shift, so I didn't do it, but I did intuitively do something kind of like it. I did meditate. I did find I usually meditate for 30 minutes every day. I did find it much harder to meditate with the mushrooms. My mind was like do. So I went for a run, which I do quite often. I've never run with a microdose before. I thought, okay, we'll try this out. So I was out running with my dog and I felt like slightly out of my body. I was like not feeling the normal, oh, this sucks. I hate this fucking thing. Why am I running kind of stuff that usually is going on in my head. But I did notice two pains that came through it. One is in my knee and one is in my hip. And I thought, oh, those are real pains then. But when the
Wow, that's a good thought.
But the funny part is, because I thought I was like, run it. When the timer came on, I did like 15 minutes for a half a mile. I was running so slow. What really did come up, which is really interesting, is I have been blue for the last week and I couldn't figure out why, which is why I decided to do this. And as I was finishing up my very slow run, I realized that I'm blue because this is my first Halloween without my children. Because I was in the neighborhood, I saw the leaves, I saw the decorations, and I was like, oh, you're just missing your kids.
Oh,
That's all that's going on here.
yeah. Oh,
And then I had a couple little tears and I'm like, it's okay. This is like a death and rebirth process because we're all changing right now in a really big way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a cool experience, even though I run slow as shit when I'm microdosing.
That's awesome. Although probably you running slow as shit is me running really fast. So it's all relative.
I'm just picturing you like frolicking.
I think I kind of was because it felt very out of body and I was like, oh, leaves. Oh, this. Oh, skeletons. It was really beautiful, actually. I am interested in something that you talk about. I am actually interested how it would affect Raquel and I because we're both in menopause. But you talk about cyclical microdosing. God, I wish I had learned some damn thing about my cycle.
Yes.
Was gone because I did not. But I do have two daughters and I really wish for them to kind of repattern their life with their cycle. And wondering how microdosing, how cyclical patterning, how learning about our menstrual cycles. Teach us a little bit about all of that. What do you know?
Oh my God, so much. So when I started my healing journey in 2019, I really did a lot of work around the divine feminine because my dad's a preacher. I'm not a Christian anymore. And I really had to do a lot of deprogramming of my Christian upbringing. The thing that I was really leaning into was this divine feminine aspect, the divine feminine archetypes, the goddess archetypes. And so when I would sit in meditation that year, I kept hearing, you've got to get off of birth control because you're stifling your feminine energy. And I'd been on the pill for like 16 years. Knew I was never going to have a kid, but because of my piss poor reproductive education in South Carolina in the early 2000s, late 90s, I thought I could get pregnant any day. I mean, as a teenager, I thought I could get pregnant.
We all thought that.
Right? If my boyfriend looked at me, I thought I was going to get pregnant.
Yeah.
That's what they told us.
Yeah. Basically.
Yeah.
So I was so scared. My husband got a vasectomy because
congratulations.
Because
great.
Vasectomies prevent abortions.
They sure do. 100%, right?
Yeah.
So he got a vasectomy and then I came off of the pill and all hell broke loose. I was 33, feeling like I was in puberty. I had horrific mood swings, lost my libido completely. Granted, this was 2020. I was the essential anchor. I was the one who was at work all the time. They never let me anchor from my fucking living room because I was too valuable. More stress, more trauma, and my period did not come back for 8 or 9 months. So I did what my masculine energy investigator self knew to do, which was read all the books, take all the supplements, try to do it right, masculine in my menstrual cycle. And finally, what worked is I slowed down and started to reconnect with my womb. The things that I would say about the cycle that I find to be most important. The first thing is that your menstrual cycle is not just when you bleed. That's your menstrual phase, your bleeding phase. It's actually the first day of your bleed, all the way until the day before your next bleed. So usually that's anywhere between 25 and 35 days. Within that time frame, you have 4 very distinct inner seasons. So inner spring, inner summer, inner fall, inner winter. Now, winter is when we bleed. It's when we are most inward. It's like when we want to be cozy, cuddly. It's when we need those warming foods where we just kind of want to hibernate and be left alone. And then after your bleed, you're in spring, energy is rising, summer when we're ovulating, and then inner fall when we're back to, I call it the harvest, like you're getting things ready. It's my favorite time, but it's also the time that a lot of folks have problems with PMS. So understanding your unique cycle and your unique phases. So I have a pretty tricky inner spring and inner summer because for the really longest time, I had a very long cycle. And that meant I stayed in that energy for like 14 days. That's too fucking long. Like a girl needs to rest. And so I would be cranky and irritable when a lot of my female counterparts were feeling their very best at ovulation. Now, as I venture into perimenopause, because your girl is very much in perimenopause, my period is multiple days late right now. After going from a 26-day cycle, we're probably going to be a 35-day cycle this time around. That much fluctuation, by the way, 5 or more days, a good sign that either you have a hormonal irregularity or you're in perimenopause. Knowing what your phases look like, knowing what your cycle feels like is really important. And I think that is why we get told to ignore it, because when we can learn to live in alignment with the cycle, when we know when we should plan things, when we're feeling really tuned in, we are really powerful. I really think it's like a superpower. And
I do too.
and
we're not
so
taught to think about what our different cycles feel, or different parts of our cycle feel like.
No, we're taught to live on the man cycle, which is a daily 24-hour drive.
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
That is not who we are.
No. When it comes to cyclical microdosing. So I spent 2 years as a menstrual cycle coach and educator before I ventured into the realm of psychedelics and added that into the practice. And I had this hypothesis around menstrual cycle and mushrooms really early in my own journey with mushrooms. What I decided and discovered was that if the menstrual cycle impacts everything in our life, because it does, then it would clearly impact how we're microdosing. But no one who has a period has ever created a microdosing protocol that I could find, at least not a very popular one. And so I took the main rituals and protocols out there, which are the Fadiman and Stamets protocols, and gave them a cyclical twist. In the 2 weeks where you're feeling really good, spring and summer, you microdose roughly twice a week. It's 1 day on, 2 days off, 1 day on, 2 days off, repeat. When your symptoms come around, you can microdose up to 5 times a week. Usually 3 days on the medicine, skip 2 days, 3 days on, skip 2 days. What I have seen that do is decrease cramps, decrease mood swings all month long, and improve patience and resiliency throughout the menstrual cycle. And it's pretty quick. But I'll also say that when I was working with people prior to adding in mushrooms, if you give your menstrual cycle some attention, it will start to, I almost want to say, it'll start acting right. It'll start to a lot of times give you fewer problems. I can't say that for everyone, because clearly there are folks who are out there who have endometriosis and are really living in a big pain body around their cycle. But for folks who have general cramps, I've seen like teenagers go from like an 8 on the scale to a 4 on the scale just with living in alignment with their cycle and making a couple of big changes, like dairy is a big trigger and certain other things are big triggers. But cyclically with microdosing, it's just been so interesting to watch the people who are doing it learn their body. And I think that's what mushrooms want. They want us to take care of ourselves, because when we take care of ourselves, we take care of the community and the planet. And we're much better able to understand the language of our body when we understand the language of our womb, which for
Mm-hmm.
those in female bodies is the governing factor.
Mm-hmm.
I also think so. There's like been one study on the menstrual cycle and psilocybin, and you know how many people were in it? 3.
Oh, wow.
Of course.
That does not even count as a study.
Well, it's all we
It
got.
does, because we need it.
Well,
It's all
okay,
we
yeah,
got.
but
But
damn.
yes. And what it showed were for 2 of those participants, their irregular cycles became more regular. One of them, who had PMDD, while her symptoms did not abate, she was more able to manage the symptoms. And so that's the thing here, right? When I've worked with people with PMDD, the symptoms might still be there, but your ability to respond to the symptoms feels much stronger. You're much more able to feel, I think resilient is probably the best word, amidst the things that you're challenged with. With the studies out there around the cycle and around psilocybin, there's only that one. And yet for me, I know what I know, right? I know what I've experienced in my own body. I know what I've seen people experience who I've worked with. And I think the thing that really stands out for me is that mushrooms to me feel deeply feminine. Like when you think about the way that mycelium is working in the fertile soil to make our earth be able to produce life, and how connected the mycelium network is, and how connected the womb is with all of really humanity, since we all came from a womb. I really think that it's a deeply feminine medicine. And I have had some deeply feminine experiences tripping full mushrooms and with microdosing, that for me, I just think it's such a potent medicine for those in female bodies who want to reconnect with what life is really about. And I think that's about coming home to the body.
One of the reasons I have decided to do the microdosing at this point is because of the fact that I never connected with my menstrual cycle. I was on the pill for many years, then I had children, then I had a hysterectomy. I don't feel like I know my natural cycles, and I don't feel like there's anywhere I can go to get that information except for within myself. Like you said, there's one study. What studies have there been about perimenopause and psilocybin, or menopause and psilocybin? Are there some?
There's one coming, and you've got to sign up for it. So it's by a group out of the UK called Hystelica. Hystelica, I believe. They are currently looking for volunteers who are microdosing through peri or menopause. That's you, girl.
Right.
That's you. So
That's
it's
both of us.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't done the microdosing yet, but
well,
yeah.
all we got to do is
get you some
start
mushrooms.
you up.
And that is what you'd asked, right? Like, how would this work for folks who are post bleeding years? I really think that we can learn to connect with the energy of our seasons by connecting with the moon.
Okay, I was going to ask that. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
So when I started my spiritual journey, like the moon and I, like we were just jiving all the time. I really think that as a feminine being, the moon has just an interesting pull on us. Male hormones are very much like the sun. Ours are like the moon. If you don't bleed anymore for whatever reason, you can start to align with the moon's cycles. And there's a couple of ways you can do that, but the one that's easiest is when it's in the new moon phase, i.e. there's no moon in the sky, it's a dark moon. That is your inner winter. That's when you're bleeding, your time to go in.
Oh, see, I thought it was the other way.
And you can do both, but with this, your inward time is when it's dark, and as it gets brighter, your energy rises.
That makes so much sense. I had it backwards.
And so the dark moon is the new moon?
Yes.
Okay.
When there's no moon in the sky, it's the new moon. It will wax to full, so it will grow to full, and that's when you're in spring and summer. And at full moon, that's generally when our ancestors would have ovulated. That's when the earth is more fertile. And then when this moon goes from full back down to dark, so the waning phase, that would be your fall and back into winter. So you can align with the different seasons. And so you could think of things like, okay, well, when the moon is in its darkness, I'm going to do more of the inward things. Like maybe I will cook something really yummy, or I will, if you're into it, like do some spiritual practices that involve like a vision journey or meditation under the moon, right? And then as the moon gets full, maybe you learn something new. Maybe you go out with your friends more often. Maybe you're doing things like volunteering. As it goes back into its dark phase, again, that's your turn to come back inward to yourself. But I think, regardless of whether or not you're wanting to microdose to connect with your feminine rhythms and your feminine body, menopausal women, so it's so interesting. People that I work with most often are in perimenopause, like 42 to 55, and I'm 38. It just seems to me to be like that phase of life is like, I'm done with all this shit. Enough is enough. I'm ready to take
Yep.
charge.
Totally.
And
Yep.
regardless of where you are in your cycle, if you have your cycle still or not, you're in your wise woman. Like you are the wise woman. Like, yes, they want to say it's crone. I can't wait to be crone, but it's like the wise wild woman vibe where it's like, take no shit, take no prisoners,
Wear
and
whatever the fuck I
I'm
want.
I am doing me. That is
Yeah.
such an interestingly beautiful archetype to work with mushrooms as well, because we have so much work to do. Like we were saying earlier, like we've been conditioned to give more, to be the good girl. That's why I say I love working with midlife women and like elder millennials, because sometimes we work with their cycle, but more often than not, we're working with how are we going to deprogram all this shit that you were raised with for so many decades. I almost said centuries, past lives.
Yes, there's reality in that too.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Intergenerational shit.
Yeah.
I had some big ancestral stuff come up in one of my mushroom journeys, big time. But yeah, so I guess hopefully that answers. So there's certainly ways that you can connect with the rhythm of the cycle, even if you no longer bleed. And I think that can be really healing for folks who didn't do it when they were in their bleeding years. And if you do nothing else, then just know that when you're past the stage of bleeding, now it's your turn to be that wise wild woman, to show us maiden mothers how it can really be. Like we don't have to, subscribe to the bullshit that we do in our younger versions of ourselves.
That's totally right on.
Can I just say, everything that you just said, Leslie, and the conversations we've just had around all this are so soothing for me, because literally, as I was doing the research for today, and the stuff about microdosing and the cyclical nature of our menstruation and all of this, I was like, I kind of felt a little sad, because I was like, well, I don't get the opportunity to experience that because I don't have a period anymore. And I was kind of thinking like, well, what cycle do I get to live by? You know what I mean? And so I was feeling a little kind of like, well, shit, that kind of sucks. I want to live in synchronicity and cycle with things too, and so to hear you talk about this is amazing. We can, just because we aren't bleeding anymore, we are still valuable. We still are connected with all of the cycles. That just made me feel really awesome. So thank you for saying that, because I was also thinking like, how can this be helpful for women or in people who aren't menstruating anymore? How can this be helpful for people who are, like what you were saying earlier, who are dealing with lack of mental focus or brain fog or anxiety or ADHD or all of the above? We can still live in cycle and in harmony with the world around us. That just felt like a hug.
And I'm so happy that landed for you, because I think as I get older, I actually had this conversation with my husband this morning, because I was like, I know you had a vasectomy, but should I get a pregnancy test? Like, what if I'm fucking pregnant? And this is not a possibility, but like, I'm a worrier. Surprise, surprise. And I'm like, oh my goddess, the next 10 years, I'm just going to be worried if I'm pregnant. This is going to suck. And then I'm not going to have my period anymore. He's like, well, won't you kind of be like glad when you don't have it anymore? I'm like, no, I feel like I'm going to be really sad. But that's just because I didn't have a period until I was 35, because I medically silenced it for so long, I do find it to be a joy. Now, I'm privileged in that I don't have a very painful period and I haven't had a lot of problems with my period. And so other folks may have a completely different lived experience.
Mhm.
But I would just say, if you're someone who is no longer bleeding, maybe you do need to do a little grief around or a little grief work around the fact that, okay, I didn't learn this when I was younger. I didn't learn this in my bleeding years. Now I can honor it in my own way and then turn around and make sure that those behind me see it for what it is. Because that's what I'm saying. Like, I
Mhm.
think that you, society wants to tell you that you don't matter after a certain age, but my goddess, like, you matter the most, in my opinion, because we need the people who are just a little ahead of us to show us the way. And that's
Yep.
kind of how I see myself. It just happens that I'm a little younger than most of the people that I work with, but it all adds up
You're
in the end.
you're still showing the way. We can all learn from each other, whether, the person that we're learning from is younger than us or older than us. I think that's fantastic.
We've run out of time. Is there anything that you wanted to tell our audience that we didn't give you the opportunity to say?
I think we had such a wonderful conversation about so many things. The only thing that I would say is, and we didn't talk that much about it, but I would say probably the biggest thing microdosing gave me was sobriety. It really helped me stop choosing coping and comfort mechanisms that were deeply damaging to my body. And so I've been sober almost 2 years, and it was a shock, honestly, to even be this far. I had experimented with it before without microdosing being in the mix. And so it's just been really interesting to me to see how my brain has completely rewired itself around alcohol. Like, I'll even like try to tempt myself. Like, here's your favorite wine. Have a little taste. Tastes like crap. So, and it also tastes like straight up self-betrayal. So that's, I think, one of the things that has been a really tangible benefit in my own microdosing. The other thing I'll say is I have not microdosed in a protocol for over a year. So
Woo!
this isn't something that you do forever. This is something that you do for a season, right? We're all
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
seasons here.
Mhm.
That's a very big theme in my life. It comes to you when you need it most, and then naturally it goes away. You won't feel called to it anymore. It's not something that you can get physically addicted to, but because of our human nature, psychologically, sometimes we can think, oh, we're only feeling this because of this. And so I like folks to hear that I have not microdosed in over a year in any type of main protocol. And that's a protocol is when you commit to microdosing for 8 to 12 weeks at a time. I've used it every once in a while for things like my social anxiety. On Thanksgiving last year, you bet your ass I was microdosing because that's like one of the most highly triggering holidays for my eating disorders and my alcohol. So I microdosed
Right.
to deal with it. It's just such a wonderful teacher and gift that I think, are given by Mama Earth to help us go through the things we need to go through. But if you're listening and you think it's going to be like another pill you have to take forever, because the Western medical model tells you if you've got anxiety or depression, you're on this meds for life,
Mhm.
absolutely not the case, right? Like, I've seen massive, massive changes in my life. 8 weeks here, another 8 weeks there, and then a month later. So it's just fascinating.
Man, Leslie, thank you so much for talking to us about all of this and for sharing your knowledge with us. You're not just, kind of gatekeeping it. You're sharing it. Thank you for doing that.
And how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Let's give them a link in the show notes for the shift
Yep.
method, the new and
Yep.
improved. She
Yep.
has a pretty new face. In that, you'll also have the ability to book a free one on one discovery call with me. I'm on Instagram, and we know how social algorithms go. So find
Yeah.
me at Leslie Draffin. And I also have a podcast, The Light Within, and a YouTube page that I just started. So there's a lot of
Yes.
free things that you can find of mine. I'm a generator in human design, so a girl loves to create. But I would say
Nice.
the shift method first, and then, yeah, hit me up on Instagram. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Oh, do you want to recap?
Yes. What an amazing conversation.
Yeah, I loved it.
Leslie is incredibly talented and interesting and interested, and lots of
Okay,
great
so
information.
so let's get to the meat here. Are you going to microdose or what?
Yes,
You are going to try it?
I am. It just sounds like it would be so incredibly beneficial in so many ways. One of the things that I had wanted to ask, but we didn't because we can't get to all of our questions, was about the benefit of microdosing as opposed to or in conjunction with talk therapy. We've talked on the show countless times about how I'm in therapy, been in therapy probably my entire adult life, off and
Yeah.
on, right? More on than off. I have found that I think I'm getting to the end of how useful talk therapy can be for me.
All right, you want my opinion?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I think talk therapy has its benefits. I remember when my mom was staying with me when she had Alzheimer's and I got my therapist, the most beneficial thing my therapist did for me was when I talked about my childhood. She said, oh my God, because I thought my childhood was normal. And I knew it was kind of whacked. Like I had this sense like my childhood was fucking whacked, dude, right?
Yeah.
But everybody seemed kind of whacked. And just to have her do that was
Yeah.
validating.
Mhm.
And we worked through some things. She gave me some skills to work with my mom, my anger, stuff like that. But the thing that was really breakthrough for me, that therapy was like, it was like a gateway drug.
Mhm.
It got me started,
Yeah.
but it didn't sustain me very long. The thing that has been the thing that has sustained me is the holotropic breath work. It's so funny because Leslie was just talking about pleasure and starting with where you were in childhood. My last whole journey was about that. I was in wherever you go when you're doing the holotropic breathing, and I was like, oh, what did I like as a child? I remembered liking butter pecan ice cream. Like that was my
Oh.
flavor. That's what I liked.
Uh-huh.
I remembered that I really liked skiing. I liked being outside in the snow. And I started having these memories of childhood and what brought me joy. And I think she's really on to something here about the pleasure kind of being, in some ways, the gateway to our power. And we as
Mhm.
women, maybe men too, I'm not going to say that this is just a woman thing. In order to function in our society, we have closed down these
Mhm.
moments of pleasure, of joy, of fun.
Mhm.
And so the holotropic breath work has brought me back to that. The psilocybin, the big journey that I took, cracked my trauma open and helped me heal.
Wow.
Today was the first day I've ever tried microdosing.
Mhm.
What I can say about it is, first of all, I wasn't tripping or anything. It's not anything to be scared of.
Mhm.
The world felt different. It felt more vibrant. I
Mhm.
felt like my heart was more open. I remember,
Because you were different.
yeah, I remember when I was walking through the neighborhood after the run, I felt my chest like open and I was like, oh, I'm open. I'd like to get to know my neighbors. I remember seeing the Trump signs and the Harris signs and the Trump signs. And I was like, fuck this, you guys. Like, I get that we have to worry about that. But on
Mhm.
a whole nother level, these are just my neighbors. They're
Mhm.
people. We really have to figure out a way to connect with the earth again and to bridge these gaps and to stop being polarized. And I know in the era of Trump, it's hard not to be polarized because
Mhm.
that's terrifying on some level. But at the
Mhm.
same point, let's get past this election and let's figure out how to how to stop doing this madness.
Well, like Leslie said, we have to reconnect with who we are. We have to reconnect with ourselves. We, as a society, are so disconnected from ourselves
Our
and from
bodies.
each other. We aren't the only ones who are like, what do you mean embodiment? What do you mean feeling something in my body? What are you talking about? Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I mean, so many people are going through that same thing. And then you extrapolate that out, and people are like, what do you mean connect with my community? What do you mean? What do my neighbors think? And, I'll admit, I don't really know my neighbors.
I don't either. I know
Yeah.
based on their political signs who votes for who, and that's all I know.
Yeah.
I don't know either. But today when I was out there, I said hi to every single person I walked by when my heart opened. And there was this young girl raking leaves in the front yard. And I came around the corner, I saw her dad in the back, and I waved at him and I said hi. And I got the biggest, brightest smile back.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like, hello.
People generally And yes, I go back and forth between being really skeptical and cynical, and then very Pollyanna and naive. But I think at my core, I think people literally are just happy to be acknowledged and recognized. And if you say hey to somebody and wave, they're going to say hey and wave too.
Well, yes and no,
Look,
not
look,
because
I'm trying to
okay,
connect to my
I
Pollyanna non-skeptical side, woman.
I hear you, but what I want to say about that is it's what we choose to do. When we choose to say
Yeah.
hello, that opens up the world. However, we don't know where the person we're saying hello is. They
Yeah.
may be in deep despair, and them not saying hello back to us is not because they don't like us. That's
Well,
just
right.
our
Yeah.
head. That's our
Hmm.
head going, oh God, I must look ugly today. They don't want to say hi back. No, that's
Hmm.
not real. It's where they are.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But I really love this idea of getting up, journaling for 2 minutes. Then what do we do?
Breathing for 3 minutes,
Breathing for 3, and we're
and
doing,
then movement for 4 minutes.
but what type of breathing were doing? We're doing the
It's let's
breathe
see.
in
Yeah.
through your
Uh
nose.
breathe in through your nose for 4, and then audibly breathe out for 8. You know what? I will say that I read somewhere a couple weeks ago how if it was possible to use breathing to calm yourself down and maybe to even lower blood pressure, that sort of thing. And one thing that I found was you take a deep breath in and then you breathe out slowly longer than your inhale.
Mhm.
And I have been trying that, and I cannot tell you how great that feels. And I've been doing some of that after my workouts, like after I stretch and I'm just kind of sitting there. And it's, even on mornings when I'm just in a big hurry and whatever, just doing that, maybe just even 1 or 2 breaths, it really centers me and it's calming and I just feel better. So, breath work, getting in your body, doing whatever you need to do to calm your mind and open your mind and change the way you think, whether it's psilocybin or somatic work or breath work,
Or all of it
or
combined.
all of it combined.
Yeah.
These are things that are helpful to us.
Yeah. The only thing that I will add to that, because you brought it up before, early
Mhm,
in the episode, you asked Leslie about bringing up trauma and that.
mhm.
I do think it's important to work with somebody, to
Yeah,
have somebody who's a coach, whether you look into hiring Leslie or whether you know somebody. I think it's important to have somebody help you. Number one, in case something traumatic really does come up
mhm,
and you need some help digesting that. But also, what I find with holotropic breath work, which is what I do most, is that issues come up that take me, and not necessarily issues, themes, ideas, coexes, which are like patterns in one's life. They
mhm.
come up and I don't necessarily know how to process them by myself.
Yeah,
To have someone to talk to not to tell us what to do, but to like
right.
talk
To
through
process it.
to process. Yeah.
Yeah, like, there have been times where you come back from a workshop and I'm texting you like, "Hey, how was it?" And you're like, "I don't know yet. I need to process it. Give me a few days." I'm like, "Oh, okay."
I think the most traumatic thing that ever happened to me in a breath work was I had this weird visualization of tangling up with my mom's umbilical cord and
Mm,
like fighting with it to try and get free. But the minute I could get free, like grabbing it back, saying, no, I don't want to be free. And then
mhm,
going back and forth. And what I realized for me, that was sort of this ego death of who I was as a mother and a daughter. My
yeah.
mom has died. My children have gone to college at the same time. It's sort of like this one part of my life is very big identity part of my life that a lot of people experience in their job. I've haven't lost it. I'm still a mom, but in some ways I've lost it.
It's changing.
It's changing. And I didn't understand. I thought ego death would be more like, I don't know, maybe more job related, or maybe more like, where do I put my worth? And then maybe that is it. Maybe my worth was tied up with being a mom and a daughter. That's what I'm saying is, if you're doing psilocybin and you're doing these practices, the somatic practices, you're doing the journaling, the breath work, etc., the dancing, all of it, it's really good to have someone to
Yeah.
talk with about,
Hmm.
to help you to digest those, in case there is kind of a psychic emergency, or
Or,
a jump in spirituality can be scary.
well, or just thinking about an issue in a different way, or thinking about something that you hadn't let yourself think about before, taking time to process it. And sometimes, and this is even without psilocybin or things like that, sometimes you need to process by talking to someone. And yeah, therapy can come in there, talking to a trusted guide like Leslie, or, somebody else in your life that you trust, that you can talk to and process with without judgment.
Again, I'm gonna go back to our discussion about therapy versus psychedelics, etc. The thing about therapy is, a lot of those relationships come from the masculine. They're very structured. Therapists don't tell you a whole lot about their lives. There's not a
Hmm.
whole lot of connection going on. When
Right.
you have a coach, a guide, someone who's had the lived experience, like if you picked Leslie for your guide, for example, she's had an eating disorder. She had some coping mechanisms with alcoholism. She had a high profile job that she chose to leave behind. She's willing to talk about these things. So there's a
Hmm.
connection. She's also used psilocybin. She's done the microdosing. She's studied the cyclical process.
Hmm.
And of course, this doesn't make her an expert of you and your body,
Right.
but it allows whoever's working with someone who can talk to someone who's experienced the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
much prefer it over a therapist.
yeah, and actually, and I think where I was going with the whole therapy thing, and me saying that I feel like it's gotten to a point for me that maybe the usefulness isn't there, or the usefulness is changing, or whatever. And again, therapy is awesome. I think everybody can benefit from some kind of therapy.
For sure.
But for me, like I said, I've been in and out of therapy more on than off my entire adult life. For a long time, there was a part of me that thought, I am severely broken and I will not ever be able to stop therapy. I will have to be in therapy for the rest of my life.
And now
And
you know
and
that's a lie.
exact, and that's where I was going with this, is that I'm getting to a point. Actually, let me be real. I've already gotten to that point that I realized that therapy is not a lifelong thing for me. I'm not beyond help. I'm not broken.
That's right. You're not broken.
What I'm also realizing is that there are other modalities that can be helpful to me. Somatic work, embodiment, breath work.
I actually think Leslie would be a fantastic coach for you.
I think so too. And honestly, yeah, I think that's an important part of our conversation today, is that there are different ways that you can get to your healing.
And it's a process, and it takes time,
Yeah.
and different seasons.
Yep.
Leslie said it. It's a different season, my friend.
Absolutely. Ugh, I love this conversation so much. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Leslie.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, everyone, for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast, or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.